So my name is Chelsea Eddy, and I'm the Refugee Community Liaison for Mayor Becker's office. Part of it is just connecting with the refugee communities, getting to know the people in the communities, getting to know the leaders, making sure they know me, and then trying to connect those communities to some of the resources we have in the city. Housing programs, grant opportunities, how to get your voice heard through different channels. And then the second part of that is listening to what the refugee communities have to say and trying to make sure the city is best serving the needs of the refugee communities. And sometimes we're already doing that. Sometimes we have programs in place, but we need to change the way we're advertising them or doing outreach into these communities. But basically it's trying to find that connection point between the city and our refugee communities and leaders to making sure that we're serving them and representing them the best way we can. Well, I think the priority of city government should be to reflect the voices of all the residents that live in Salt Lake City. And refugees have some particular barriers to accessing city government. Of course, number one is language. A lot of them, English is usually the fourth, fifth, or sixth language they've learned to speak in their lifetime. And so when you're accessing information about meetings or city resources, English, it's not the first language. Secondly, our mode of getting information to communities, which is often through community councils or through social media, through email lists, those aren't always channels that refugees are tuned into and are accessing their information from. So the outreach that is done to mainstream communities doesn't always reach refugee populations. And at the same time, we have huge amounts of refugees living in Salt Lake City, working in Salt Lake City, accessing services in Salt Lake City. And so it's important as a government to reflect all of the voices in our community, but because of the barriers that a lot of refugee communities have, they're not accessing information via the other channels that mainstream community is. So it's important to have someone that's specifically focused on communicating with those communities and making sure that they are aware that we're here and we're open and we want to hear from them, and their voices are important. They have a different perspective than people that have been born and raised in the US. So there's always opportunities for community involvement. There's always different cultural events happening every single weekend, and refugee communities love to have mainstream population go because it's a chance for them to show who they are, where they're from, what their community is to the greater Salt Lake City community. And then there's plenty of volunteer opportunities also. We actually have a program in the city called the Refugee Volunteer Program, where we have an opportunity for mainstream volunteers to volunteer with refugee families. We have several opportunities. One is a volunteer can mentor a refugee family for about a year, and they would just meet with the family weekly. They go to parks, go to festivals, go to the library, help the refugee families with sometimes reading mail, accessing other services they may need. But the point of that is really just to connect our mainstream community with our refugee community so that they have that chance to meet refugees. We also have another option that is less time intensive, but also gives people the opportunity to work with refugee communities. And then throughout the community, there's plenty of other nonprofit organizations that constantly need volunteers. You know, there's citizenship tutoring, there's English skills tutoring, there's advising refugee boards, there's tutoring youth, there's going to community centers, there's tons of opportunities, and I'm always happy to help point people in the right direction on finding a match that would be good for them.